There is a particular kind of intelligence that only desperation produces. Not the intelligence of classrooms or books or people who have the luxury of thinking slowly. The other kind. The kind that is born in the space between a locked door and the will to survive. The kind that watches and waits and catalogues every footstep, every pause, every moment a man looks left instead of right, and builds from all of it a map so precise it could have been drawn by someone who had never been afraid. I was afraid every single day for 3 years. And I was precise every single day for 3 years. I learned the blind spots the way water learns a stone, not by force, but by patience. By being present in the same place long enough that the stone eventually shows you where it is softest. Guard Pellin looked left at the third torch every night at the 11th hour, because there was a draft from the eastern corridor, and the torch always guttered. Guard Thresh paused at the base of the south stairs for 40 seconds every rotation, because his right knee had been broken badly 2 years ago, and the cold made it seize. Guard Movin, the youngest, the most watchful, had one blind spot, and it was not spatial. It was personal, and I had found it in the first month. 3 years of finding, 3 years of mapping, 3 years of waiting for the night when all the pieces aligned. The night finally came, and when I stepped through the last gate into the open air, cold and dark and enormous around me, I stopped. Because someone was already there. Before we begin, drop a comment below with your country and what time it is right now where you're watching. Whether it's sunrise in Nairobi, midnight in New York, afternoon in Canada, or evening in France, I want to know. Don't just sit back, tell me where in the world you are. Now let's dive into the story. Chapter 1. The night the map became real. The 11th hour. I had rehearsed this moment 412 times. Not approximately, exactly. I had run the sequence in my mind every night for 14 months, from the moment I identified the final piece of the route to the moment I stopped rehearsing because rehearsing more would not make me readier, only more tired. 412 times. My name is Thessaly Vorn Arden. I am 24 years old, and I have been inside the walls of Drakenhollow Estate for 3 years, 2 months and 9 days. Tonight I am leaving. The dress I am wearing is not mine. It belongs to one of the kitchen maids, a gray wool thing, plain and dark, the kind of clothing that renders a person invisible in corridor shadow. I had borrowed it 2 weeks ago, and returned it the same day, and borrowed it again tonight through the gap under the linen room door where the maid, Essie, left things she did not want anyone to see her handing over directly. Essie did not know exactly what she was helping with. She knew I needed to move without being recognized. She had not asked questions, and I had not offered answers, which was the architecture of every alliance I had built inside Drakenhollow's walls, useful, mutual, and carefully bounded. Under the dress, the map. Not paper. Paper makes noise, paper tears, paper can be found on a body and read by anyone. The map was in my head. Every corridor, every guard station, every rotation schedule, every blind spot I had identified and verified and cross-referenced across 3 years of patient observation. It lived behind my eyes in 3 dimensions, complete and precise, updated as recently as 3 days ago, when Pellin's rotation was adjusted by 12 minutes due to the arrival of new guests in the East Wing. I had adjusted my plan by 12 minutes accordingly. The south corridor, third torch. I pressed my back against the stone wall and counted. Pellin's footsteps were distinctive, a slight drag on the left heel from an old ankle injury that never fully healed. I had been listening to those footsteps for 3 years. I knew them the way I knew my own breathing. And now I listened to them recede. Drag, step, toward the third torch at the far end of the corridor, where the draft from the eastern passage would make the flame gutter and pull his eyes left, and I had exactly 9 seconds. I moved. Not running. Running makes sound. I moved the way I had taught myself to move in the first month, when I understood that survival inside Drakenhollow required me to become something the walls did not register. A shadow, a variance in the air, something that passed through space without disturbing it. 7 seconds. Past the second guard station. Empty. as it always was between the 11th hour and the quarter hour, because the rotation overlap was 12 seconds short, and no one had ever bothered to fix it. 5 seconds. The stairwell door, which had a catch that could be lifted without engaging the lower bolt if you applied upward pressure with 3 fingers while turning. It had taken me 4 months to find this. It had taken me 2 weeks to find the correct finger placement. It had taken me 1 month to be able to do it in under 2 seconds. 3 seconds. 2. The door opened. I went through. The south stairwell smelled of old stone and the particular cold that accumulates in enclosed spaces that receive no direct heat. I knew this cold. I had stood in this stairwell 4 times in the last year, not to escape, just to verify, to confirm that the route remained as I had mapped it and that nothing had changed. Nothing had changed. 12 steps down, the base. Thresh's station. I stopped at the corner before the base landing. 40 seconds. Thresh's knee seized every rotation at this point. He stood at the base of the stairs and he waited, not waiting for anything. Just standing and breathing through the seizing. His weight shifted to the left leg. His attention turned inward in the way that physical pain turns attention inward. 40 seconds of inward attention. I had 30 of them left. I counted. At 31, I moved past the base landing in the 3 steps it required, staying against the wall, and Thresh was there, large, middle-aged, with the particular stillness of a man managing pain, and his eyes were pointed at the middle distance, and not at me. I was past him before he completed his exhale. The eastern passage, the kitchen corridor, the scullery door, and then, Movin. Guard Movin was 21 years old and had been stationed at Drakenhollow for 8 months. He was the youngest guard on the rotation, and the only one who had never given me the impression of being entirely certain where to look. The others had their patterns, their habits, their reliable inattentions. Movin was different. Movin watched too much and in too many directions, and had the quality of a person whose attention had not yet calcified into habit. His blind spot was not a place. It was a person. There was a girl in the kitchen, Wrestle, the head cook's daughter, 17 and quiet, and the subject of Movin's entirely unspoken and entirely visible attention every time she came near the scullery corridor at the end of her shift. At the 11th hour and 22 minutes, Wrestle left the kitchen through the scullery to take the night's leavings to the compost yard. She had done this every night for 3 years. She would do it tonight. I waited. Movin's back was to the scullery door. His attention, as always at this time, was arranged into official watchfulness, but oriented, with the specific quality of a young man trying not to be obvious about something he cannot stop noticing. Toward the door, Wrestle would come through. She came through. She did not look at him. She never looked at him. She carried the bucket with the brisk efficiency of someone who has a task and intends to complete it, and she went past him and into the compost yard, and Movin's eyes followed her with the helpless, patient attention of someone who has accepted that he will always be watching something he cannot have. I went through the scullery door. I crossed the compost yard. I went through the gap in the outer wall that I had identified 14 months ago, a section where the mortar had crumbled behind a stack of storage crates, leaving a space 30 inches wide, unreported because the crates concealed it, and no one had moved them in years. I moved the crates. I went through the gap. I replaced the outer crate by feel, reaching back through the space, and then I was outside. The night air hit me like cold water. Not unpleasantly. It hit me the way things hit you when you have been without them too long, when the absence of something has gone on so far past your original estimate of endurance that the presence of it again is almost too large to receive. I stood outside the walls of Drakenhollow Estate for the first time in 3 years, 2 months, and 9 days. The sky above me was enormous, cloud-covered, moonless, the specific dark of a winter night without stars. The cold pressed against my face and my hands, and the thin gray wool of the borrowed dress. The ground beneath my feet was frozen and hard. I took one breath, took a step, and stopped. There was a figure standing 30 feet ahead of me in the dark, still, waiting, not hiding, simply standing in the open, as though he had been there for some time and was in no particular hurry about it. I could not see his face. I could see his outline, tall, broad, in a dark riding coat, with the stillness of someone who is not surprised to see me. My 3 years of planning had not included this. My hand went to the wall behind me. Reflex, the instinct to put stone at my back, and I forced it down. "Thessaly Vorn Arden," the figure said. His voice was low, controlled. And underneath the control was something that did not belong there, something that cracked through the precision of it like a fault line in bedrock. He knew my name, not my household name, not the name Drakenhollow's records used, my full name, in the exact sequence my mother had given it to me, which I had not heard spoken by anyone in 3 years, 2 months, and 9 days. "Who are you?" I said. My voice was steadier than I expected. He stepped forward into the faint light of the estate's outer torch, and I saw his face. And the night, which had been so perfectly planned, became something else entirely. Chapter 2: How a Girl Learns to Become Invisible. 3 years ago, I arrived at Drakenhollow in the back of a covered cart. Not as cargo. I want to be precise about this because precision matters, and because the distinction, though it may seem small from the outside, was the thing I held on to in the first months when holding on to anything was difficult. I was not cargo. I was a ward. This is what the document said, the one bearing the seal of Lord Cassivorn Drak, master of Drakenhollow Estate, signed with his careful and elaborate signature, and delivered to my uncle's house on a Tuesday afternoon in November, with 2 guards in a covered cart, and the specific courtesy of powerful men delivering decisions they have already made. The ward arrangement, the document called it. In recognition of the outstanding debt of House Arden to House Drak, the eldest daughter of the late Fennec Arden will serve as ward of Drakenhollow Estate until the debt is discharged, or other arrangement is reached by mutual agreement. My father had been dead for 4 months when the document arrived. The debt was real. I had known about it for 2 years, the accumulated consequence of my father's final, desperate attempt to save the Arden family's deteriorating finances through a series of investments that had seemed reasonable and proved disastrous. Lord Cassivorn Drak had been my father's primary creditor. He had extended the credit generously, with the specific generosity of a man who understood that generosity at the right moment creates an obligation that interest alone cannot match. My father had died before the debt could be serviced. I was the eldest daughter. I was 21 years old, and I had a younger brother named Orvin, who was 16, and a younger sister named Calla, who was 13, and the document that arrived with the cart and the guards also contained, in its final paragraph, a clause specifying that in the event of the ward's non-compliance or departure from Drakenhollow Estate prior to the debt's discharge, the outstanding balance would be pursued against House Arden's remaining assets, which both parties understood to mean my uncle's house, the only remaining Arden asset, and everything in it. My uncle had 2 children. My brother and sister lived with him. I got into the cart. Drakenhollow Estate sat on the northern edge of the Kivrath territory, where the land flattened from hills into the wide, frost-hardened plain that stretched toward the territorial border. The estate was large, not beautiful, not in the way that some large estates achieve beauty through the accumulation of care and attention across generations, but substantial and imposing in the way of things built to demonstrate rather than to please. The walls were high. The gates were iron. The main house was a gray stone structure that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. I arrived in November and stood in the main courtyard and looked at the walls and understood immediately that the first task was not endurance. It was mapping. Lord Cassivorn Drak was 63 years old, with silver hair swept back from a broad forehead, and the kind of physical presence that has more to do with assumption than actual size. He received me in the formal receiving room, high ceilings, dark furniture, a fire that was adequate but not generous, and told me, with the specific courtesy that was his permanent mode, that my rooms had been prepared, that I would be expected at meals unless otherwise engaged, that the estate's library was available to me, and that my situation would be reviewed annually. He did not specify what the review would assess. He did not specify how the debt would be discharged. He was courteous and precise and entirely opaque, and I sat across from him in the formal receiving room and listened and said the correct things, and behind my eyes I began, immediately and methodically, to map. The first 3 months were observation. I moved through Drakenhollow in the careful way of someone who understands that visibility is itself a form of information, that being seen in certain places at certain times tells the people watching you something about your intentions, and that controlling what they see is the first form of control available to you. I was the ward. The strange girl from the fallen house. The polite, quiet presence at meals who asked no questions and caused no difficulty, and presented, to anyone watching, the portrait of someone who had accepted her situation. I had not accepted my situation. I was studying it. The guards first. There were 12 on the standard rotation, 8 active, 4 resting, cycling through 6-hour shifts in a pattern I mapped completely within the first 6 weeks. Each one had a name, a history I assembled from fragments of overheard conversation, a physical characteristic that affected how they moved and therefore where they looked. Pellin with the ankle, Thresh with the knee. Movin, the young one, who arrived in the 3rd month and immediately complicated my assessment because he was less predictable than the others. The walls second. The estate was large enough that a thorough physical survey required patience. I could not walk every corridor at every hour without attracting attention, so I walked sections systematically over months. I noted every door, every window, every section of wall that showed wear or compromise. The crumbling mortar section in the outer wall behind the compost crates I found in the 9th month, and I spent the next 2 weeks measuring it against my body's width before adding it to the map. The 3rd thing I mapped was people, not the guards. The household, the cook and her daughter, the steward, the 3 maids, the groundskeeper, the stable staff, their patterns, their allegiances, their private griefs and small comforts. I was not manipulating them. I want to be clear about this also, because it matters. I was not building a network of unwitting tools. I was building an understanding of the human landscape I was operating in, and from that understanding, I identified the people whose situations aligned with mine in ways that might occasionally make cooperation natural. Essie was one. Essie, the cook's daughter, had been at Drakenhollow since she was 9. She was 19 now, and her situation was not a ward arrangement, but it was not free either. She was paid a minimal wage for work that consumed her entirely, with no clear path to anything else, and she had the particular quality of a person who has been overlooked for so long, she has begun to cooperate with the overlooking. I did not overlook her. I noticed her. Specifically, carefully, genuinely. Because she was worth noticing, and because people who have not been noticed in a long time respond to being genuinely seen in ways that are not about debt or transaction, but about something more fundamental. We became, carefully, something like friends, and in the 2nd year, when I began to need small things, a dress left under a door, a particular scullery door left unlatched on specific nights, a moment's look in a different direction, I asked, and she helped, and neither of us needed to make it more than it was. In the evenings, in my room, I ran the map. Every night, every sequence, every timing. Starting from my room door and ending at the gap in the outer wall, the full route in my mind, as vivid and detailed as a painting, every step and second accounted for. I was running it the night I heard, through the stone of the corridor wall, a conversation that changed everything. Lord Cassivorn Drack's voice. And another voice I did not recognize. One sentence from the other voice, low and fast, and not intended to be heard. The Arden debt was paid in full 8 months ago. Your man confirmed it. And Lord Cassivorn Drack's reply, calm as ever, entirely opaque. She doesn't know that. Chapter 3. The debt that was never real. I pressed myself against the corridor wall and stopped breathing. The voices on the other side of the stone were moving. Lord Cassivorn Drack's study was adjacent to the east corridor, a wall of approximately 18 inches of old stone, the mortar between the blocks older than the estate's current generation of residents, compressed and dried to near impermeability, but not, as I had discovered in the 2nd month, to impermeability complete. In a specific section near the third block from the floor, the mortar had dried with a hairline fracture that conducted sound with unexpected fidelity. I had discovered this by accident. I had returned to it many times since. The other voice again, male, lower than Drax, with the cadence of someone reading from a document or from memory. The final payment cleared the regional accounts office in March. Orvin Arden signed the discharge personally. The family is clear. March. It was November. 8 months. My brother Orvin had discharged the debt 8 months ago, and I was still here, in the gray stone house on the frost-hardened plain, running a map behind my eyes of a route I should have been able to walk out the front gate. I pressed my palms flat against the corridor wall. The conversation continued, something about the Eastern holdings, a trade dispute, the logistics of an arrangement I could not follow because my mind had narrowed to a single burning point and everything else had gone peripheral. He knew. Drak knew the debt was discharged. He had known for 8 months. He had said, with the specific courtesy that was his permanent mode, and which I now understood to be a very sophisticated form of cruelty, "She doesn't know that." He had said it the way a man says a thing he has said before, a thing that has become simply a feature of the landscape rather than a decision he revisits. I was not a ward anymore. I was a prisoner. And the distinction, which I had been careful to maintain in my own mind for 2 years, because it was the thing I held on to, was gone. I went back to my room and I sat on the edge of the bed, and I looked at the map behind my eyes, and something in it changed. Not the route. The route was the route, unchanged, every second accounted for. What changed was what the route meant. Before, the map was a contingency, an escape if the annual review produced nothing, if the debt dragged on indefinitely, if the situation became untenable. A plan held in reserve, ready but not urgent. Now it was the only door. I spent 3 days processing this without changing anything observable about my behavior. I went to meals. I spoke the correct number of words. I moved through the estate with the same careful invisibility I had cultivated for 2 years. I did not let the knowledge show on my face, which required more deliberate effort than anything the map had ever required, because what I wanted to do was walk into Lord Cassivorn Drak's study and place what I had heard on his desk like a document and watch his opaque face deal with being read. I did not do this, because Orvin and Calla were still in my uncle's house, and the document, the ward arrangement, contained that clause in its final paragraph, and I did not know whether the discharge of the debt also discharged the clause, and I could not find out without revealing that I knew, and I could not reveal that I knew without losing the only advantage I had. So I stayed invisible, and I added to the map. Not the escape route, that was complete. What I added was information about Drak. The pattern of his days, which I knew well by now, but had not mapped with the same precision I had applied to the guards, because until 3 days ago, I had not understood that he was the true obstacle, rather than the institution he represented. What I learned over the following weeks confirmed and complicated what I already suspected. Lord Cassivorn Drak was not a simple villain. He was not cruel in the theatrical way of stories. He did not shout or threaten or make explicit the power he held. He was cruel in the architectural way, the way that is harder to name and harder to prove, through the meticulous management of information, through the specific courtesy that rendered the people around him unable to articulate what was being done to them, because it was always done so politely. He had wanted me here for reasons that had nothing to do with the debt. This I assembled slowly, from fragments. A comment at dinner about the Arden family's territorial connections. A question asked once and not repeated about my knowledge of the Northern Pack alliances. A question I had answered carefully and incompletely, sensing something underneath it without understanding what. A visitor, 6 weeks after I overheard the corridor conversation, who arrived without announcement and dined with Drak privately, and left before morning. A man I glimpsed from the upstairs corridor, broad-shouldered, with the specific bearing of someone accustomed to significant rank. I did not know who he was. I filed the sighting and kept watching. In the 4th week after the corridor conversation, I received a letter. This was unusual. My correspondence was managed, not overtly censored, as far as I could determine, but managed in the sense that letters arrived slowly and occasionally incompletely. I had adapted by writing to Orvin in a code we had developed as children, a simple substitution system built on the names of plants our mother had grown in the kitchen garden, which was specific enough to be consistent and obscure enough to pass casual inspection. The letter that arrived in the 4th week was not from Orvin. It was from a name I did not recognize. Written in a hand I had never seen, on paper of a quality slightly better than ordinary correspondence, sealed with an unmarked wax closure rather than a family crest. The letter contained 3 sentences. I know where you are. I know why you are still there. The map you are building. Build it faster. Nothing else. No signature. No instruction beyond those 3 sentences. I sat with this letter for a long time. Then I burned it. Then I went to my room and ran the map behind my eyes. Not 412 times. Once, very carefully, looking for anything I had missed, any gap in the precision. I found 2. I fixed them, and I built faster. Chapter 4. What Movin almost noticed. The letter's existence changed the texture of everything. Not the map. The map was the map. It did not change because someone else knew about it. What changed was the landscape around the map. The understanding that I was being watched, not by Drak, not by the guards, but by a third party whose identity I could not determine and whose intentions I could not assess, introduced a variable I had not previously accounted for. Variables were what maps were built to eliminate. I spent the first week after burning the letter cycling through what I knew. Someone had access to information about my situation that was not publicly available. Someone knew I was building a route. Someone had chosen not to intervene, in either direction, not to help me more substantially, and not to report me to Drak, but simply to observe and, once, to communicate. Build it faster. Urgency. The letter contained urgency without explaining the source of it, which meant there was a timeline I was not aware of. I built faster. I began taking the map off paper, which is to say I began walking the route. Not the full route, not in sequence, not in a way that would constitute an actual escape attempt, but sections. Individual legs of the journey, at the times they would need to be executed, verifying that the timing I had calculated from observation matched the reality of execution. This required entering spaces I had not previously entered during the relevant time windows, which required managing Movin. Movin was the problem. In 2.5 years of operating inside Drakenhollow's walls, I had successfully navigated around 11 guards with varying degrees of difficulty. Movin was the 12th and the last, and his particular challenge was that he was not operating from habit, but from instinct, and instinct does not have the reliability of habit. He had almost noticed me twice. The first time was in the East Corridor during a verification walk in the 2nd month of his employment. I had timed my passage through the East Corridor based on the rotation schedule he had been given, which indicated a 12-minute gap in his coverage of that section. He completed his round 4 minutes early, because he had skipped his usual pause at the guardhouse door, a pause that every other guard took, and which I had built into my calculations without verifying it was a universal behavior rather than an individual one. He had come around the East Corridor corner and I had been 8 feet from cover. I had kept walking, toward him, with the specific, unhurried quality of someone who has every right to be where they are and is simply going somewhere. He had looked at me. I had looked past him. We had passed each other in the corridor, and I had continued to the end and turned the corner and stood with my back against the wall for 30 seconds before my heartbeat returned to a manageable frequency. The second time was worse. I was in the scullery corridor at the 11th hour, not escaping, verifying, confirming that Ressel's timing was as consistent as my observation suggested. Movin was at his station. He was doing what he did at that hour, the specific performance of watchfulness that was actually attention-oriented toward the kitchen door. But something had made him turn. Not me. I was behind him in the shadow of the storage alcove, not moving. Something else. A sound, perhaps, or simply the instinct of a young guard who had been in the building long enough to have developed a partial sense of its rhythm, and had detected a variance. He turned and looked at the alcove. I was still, not hiding. There was nothing to hide behind, only shadow and the practiced quality of not existing. I had learned this in the first year. The human eye, in low light, detects movement before shape. If you do not move, you are not a person. You are part of the architecture. He looked at the alcove for 4 seconds. I counted them. He turned back. After that, I gave Moven's instinct the respect it deserved and built a specific management strategy around it. The strategy had 2 components. The first was wrestle, ensuring that at the critical moment of my escape, Wrestle's exit through the scullery was reliable enough to provide the orienting distraction that Moven's attention would follow. The second was something I had been developing for 3 months. A sound, not a loud sound. A specific one. A small, defined noise, the sound of a latch catching on the far side of the scullery, the sound of a door settling in its frame, that I could produce from the corridor without entering the scullery, which would give Moven's instinct something directional to follow, that was not me. I had practiced producing this sound with a thin strip of metal wire I had obtained from the mending kit in the laundry room, bent to a specific angle, that could be pressed against the door's upper hinge in passing, and released to produce exactly the sound I needed. I had tested it 4 times. It worked. What I had not factored into this calculation was the night, 2 weeks before my escape, when Moven came to the alcove where I was standing and spoke to me. Not confrontationally, quietly. He had come off his shift early, a rotation change I had not been informed of, and had been walking toward the guardhouse, and had stopped at the alcove and looked into the shadow and said, "You don't have to stand in the dark." I looked at him. He was 21 and tired, and there was something in his face that was not accusation. "I've seen you," he said. "Not doing anything. Just moving. At odd hours." He paused. "I don't know what you're planning. I don't think I want to know." I said nothing. "I'm not going to say anything," he said. He said it the way someone says something true, that they have decided before arriving. "Wrestle told me." He stopped. "She told me things about this house that I didn't know when I came here." Wrestle. Wrestle had told him. Not the map. Wrestle didn't know the map. But Wrestle knew things about Drakenhollow's internal landscape that no official record would contain, that someone who arrived to guard the estate would have no other way of learning. "Why?" I said. My voice was very quiet. "Because she's been here for 10 years, he said. "And she's watched people come and go through that scullery door with less reason than you have." He paused. "And because she thinks you're the first one in a long time who's going to make it." He left. I stood in the alcove for a long time. Then I went to my room and ran the map one more time. And I thought about the letter. Build it faster. And about Moven, whose blind spot I had identified as wrestle and had understood as an inattention to exploit, and who had turned out to be something else entirely. A young man who had been given, by someone who cared about him, enough information to make a real choice. He had made the one that cost him something. That was not a blind spot. That was seeing clearly. Chapter 5 continues. Chapter 5. The name Drakenhollow did not want me to know 4 weeks before my escape. Lord Cassivorn Drak called me to his study. Not to a meal, not to the formal receiving room. The study, the inner room, the one where the real conversations happened, the one adjacent to the east corridor where the mortar had a hairline fracture, and I had stood many times in the dark listening to things not intended for me. The irony of being invited inside was not lost on me. I sat across from him at the desk. He was in his usual chair, high-backed, dark leather, positioned with the window light at his shoulder, which I recognized now as the same instinct as the formal receiving room chair, always the light behind him. He had a document on the desk that he did not look at, but whose presence he was aware of. "How are you finding the library?" he asked. "Excellent," I said. "The natural history collection is particularly well curated." "My grandfather's obsession," he said. He believed that any intelligent person's primary education should begin with the physical world before moving to the human one. A reasonable sequence, I said. This was how conversations with Drak worked. A surface of entirely genuine courtesy, every exchange slightly too careful to be real, both participants aware that what was being said was not what was being discussed. He looked at me. You have been with us for almost 3 years, he said. Yes, I said. The annual review, he said. I want to discuss it. I waited. The debt arrangement was always intended as a temporary measure, he said. A stabilizing structure for a difficult transition period. He paused. I have been considering an alternative arrangement. Here it was. 3 years of building up to here. What arrangement? I said. Your family has connections to the Northern Pack Alliances, he said. Through your mother's side, the Vorn bloodline. These connections are not widely known, and in the current political climate, they carry significant value. My mother's family, the Vorn bloodline. I had known, in the abstract, that my mother came from a wolf heritage family. Not an active pack family, the Vorn line had been human expressed for 2 generations. But the bloodline was documented, and the connections it carried into the Northern Pack territories were real, the kind of social capital that functions through recognition rather than through active participation. You want access to those connections, I said. I want a formal alliance between House Drak and the Northern Pack territories, he said. The Vorn bloodline provides an entry point that direct negotiation does not. A marriage arrangement? No, I said. He stopped. I had said it without calculation, not from a plan, but from the simple refusal that rose in me before the tactical part of my mind could assess it. I let it stand. Thessaly, he said, with the specific patience of a man explaining something to someone he has decided is being obtuse. You kept me here for 8 months after the debt was discharged, I said. The room went very still. His face did not change. The opaque courtesy remained in place like a mask that has been worn so long it has fused with the skin. But something behind it, something that lived in the very precise quality of his stillness, shifted. You have been listening, he said. The mortar in the east corridor, I said, 3rd block from the floor. A silence. Then, unexpectedly, he smiled. Not warmly, the smile of someone who has encountered a move they had not anticipated and has decided to be amused by it before determining how to respond. You are more like your mother than I expected, he said. I looked at him. You knew her, I said. I knew of her, he said. The Vorn bloodline has been on my family's radar for 30 years. Your mother was the most promising expression of it in a generation. Her marriage to your father was, he paused, a disappointment from a strategic perspective. She married for love, I said. Yes, he said. People with the Vorn bloodline often do. It's one of their less useful characteristics. I stood. I will not marry for strategy, I said. Not yours. Not anyone's. The arrangement you are proposing is not one I will accept, and if you attempt to enforce it through the clause in the ward document, I will take the question of the debt discharge to the regional legal authority, and I will do so publicly. He looked at me. You have been planning this for some time, he said. I have been planning several things for some time, I said. I left the study. I went to my room and I stood at the window and looked at the frost-hardened plain and the high walls and the iron gate, and I thought about the timeline. The study conversation had changed it. He knew I knew. He would not move immediately. He was too careful for immediate moves, but the window had narrowed. The annual review was a vehicle, and the vehicle had been refused, and a man like Drak would build a new one. 2 weeks. I had planned for 4. I compressed it to 2. That same evening I found something slipped under my room door. A folded piece of paper. On it, in the same unfamiliar hand as the letter I had burned months ago, a single word. Soon. I looked at it for a long time. Then I set the date. 14 days. Chapter 6 continues. Chapter 6. What I carried and what I left. The 14 days were the longest of the 3 years. Not because they were harder. The physical conditions were unchanged. The estate was unchanged. My routine was unchanged. They were longer because I was changed. The conversation in the study had altered something in the internal architecture of my captivity. For 3 years, I had managed my situation through the discipline of treating each day as its own contained unit, not looking forward too far, not accumulating the weight of the full duration, but engaging with each individual day as its own problem to be navigated. Now there was an end date, and I could see it from where I stood, and the distance between me and it was exactly 14 days, and I could feel every one of them as they passed, the way you can feel a wound once you know it is there. I managed it. I had learned in 3 years to manage the things I could not eliminate. You do not have to feel nothing. You have to feel the right amount, enough to be real, not so much that it interferes with function. I kept the 14 days in the part of my mind where I had built the map, the precise and ordered part, and I let the rest of me continue its performance of ordinary days. I also prepared. There was not much to prepare. The map was complete. The route was verified. The timing was established and adjusted for the compressed timeline. What remained was the small material consideration of what to bring and what to leave. This occupied one afternoon. I owned inside Drakenhollow's walls the following: clothing, mostly, the functional wardrobe of a ward, plain and adequate, a small collection of books from the library that I had been permitted to keep in my room, my mother's ring, which I wore on my right hand and which no one had ever asked about or attempted to take, possibly because it was silver and plain and not obviously valuable. A letter from Orvin, 8 months old, the most recent one that had arrived intact, in which he told me the debt was nearly discharged, and that Calla had grown 2 inches, and that his wolf had finally expressed at 19, and he was sorry he could not tell me in person. I had not known until I read that letter that Orvin had expressed. I had not known what it meant for the Vorn bloodline that both of Fennec Arden's children might carry it. I took the ring. I took Orvin's letter. I took the thin strip of wire from the mending kit, coiled in my pocket for Movin's latch sound. I took the gray wool dress and the practical boots and nothing else. I left the books. This was harder than I expected. Not the books themselves. I am not sentimental about objects, but what leaving them represented. 3 years of the estate's library had been one of the genuine things inside Drakenhollow's walls. One of the places where I was not performing invisibility, but simply present, reading. The way I had read at home before everything changed. Leaving the books on the shelf felt like leaving that part of the 3 years behind, and I had to remind myself that the part worth keeping was not in the books. On the 13th night, I went to find Essie. She was in the kitchen at the end of her shift, washing the last of the dinner pots with the brisk, efficient motion that was her permanent mode. I came into the kitchen and stood beside her at the basin, and without preamble, I said, "Tomorrow night." She did not stop washing. Her hands kept moving. "I'll leave the linen room door unlatched," she said. "I'm not coming back," I said. "I know," she said. "I don't know what happens to you if—" "Nothing happens to me," she said. "I don't know anything. I never see anything. I've been not knowing and not seeing things in this house for 10 years. I'm very good at it." She paused. "Go." I looked at her profile in the kitchen light, the specific set of her jaw, the quality of her hands moving through the water. "Come with me," I said. She was quiet for a moment. "Not yet," she said. "My mother is here. When she's ready." She glanced at me sideways. "But when I come, I'll need to know where you ended up." "I'll send word," I said. "To Orvin Arden," she said. "I know the name." I looked at her. "How do you know that name?" She smiled, brief, sideways, with a quality I had not seen from her before. Not Essie the Overlooked. Someone else. Someone who had been there all along underneath. "Someone asked me to keep an eye on you," she said. "About 2.5 years ago. Someone who knew you were here and knew you were smart enough to find your own way out, but wanted to make sure no one got in the way while you were building it." I stared at her. "Who?" I said. She went back to the pots. "You'll find out tomorrow," she said. "Go to bed. You have a long night ahead." I went to bed. I did not sleep. I ran the map 413th time. Chapter 7 continues. Chapter 7. The night everything moved. The 14th day passed in the way of days that are significant, with total indifference to their own significance. Breakfast, the library, lunch at the long table with two of Drak's business associates who were visiting and who spoke to each other across me with the comfortable obliviousness of people who have classified you as furniture. An afternoon walk in the courtyard, permitted, regulated within the estate walls. Dinner. The correct number of words. Lord Cassivorn Drak watched me across the dinner table with the specific attention of someone who had recalibrated their assessment and was determining next steps. He was too controlled to be obvious about it, but I had spent 3 years learning the texture of his attention, and this was different from his default mode, sharper, more deliberate. He was building a new vehicle. I had tonight. After dinner, I went to my room. I sat on the edge of the bed, and I breathed, and I let the 15 minutes between dinner and the beginning of the evening rotation pass in the way that significant things always ultimately pass, 1 second at a time. Then I changed into the gray wool dress. I put Orvin's letter inside the dress, against my skin. The ring was already on my hand. The wire was in my pocket. I put on the practical boots, and I laced them carefully, taking the extra 10 seconds to do it correctly, because boots that are not correctly laced become a problem at the worst possible moment. I went to the door. I opened it. The corridor outside my room was empty, as it was at this hour. The guard rotation in the residence wing did not include this corridor at the 11th hour, which was one of the first things I had mapped, and one of the things I had verified most carefully, because the first step of the route had to be certain before anything else mattered. I went left. South corridor. The third torch was visible from the corridor entrance. I could see its flame from 20 meters, a steady orange in the still air. In approximately 40 seconds it would gutter when Pellin reached it, and the draft from the eastern passage hit him. I waited at the corridor entrance. Pellin's footsteps. Drag, step, receding, approaching the torch. The torch guttered. I moved. 7 seconds. Past the empty guard station. 4 seconds. The stairwell door. 3 fingers. Upward pressure. Turn. 2 seconds. The door opened. Cold stairwell. 12 steps. The base landing. I stopped. Thresh was there. Large silhouette in the dim light at the bottom of the stairs, his weight already shifted left. The 40-second window. I counted. At 33 seconds I moved past him. 3 steps, wall side, in the darkness between the torch's reach and the corridor's turn. And he was still, breathing through his knee, his attention 100 miles away from the shadow that passed him. East passage, kitchen corridor, the wire. I took it from my pocket and held it ready. Movin was at his station. I could see his profile from the kitchen corridor entrance, the specific quality of his stillness at this hour, oriented toward the kitchen door with the practiced performance of someone trying not to look like they are waiting. The kitchen door opened. Wrestle, bucket, brisk and efficient, past him, into the compost yard. His eyes went to her. I stepped into the scullery corridor and in passing, in one smooth motion, pressed the wire against the far door's upper hinge and released it. The sound, small, defined, directional, came from the far end of the corridor, away from me. Movin's head turned toward it. I went through the scullery and across the compost yard. The crates. I moved the outer crate in the practiced motion of something done many times, quiet, efficient, controlled. The gap in the mortar. 30 inches. I went through sideways, leading with my shoulder, feeling the rough stone against the dress, against my back. I reached through and replaced the outer crate. I was outside. The night air. Cold and vast and full of the smell of frozen ground and distance. The plain stretched away from the estate's outer wall into the dark. The frost on the grass catching the faint light from the estate's exterior torches in 1,000 small reflections. The sky was cloud-covered and moonless and enormous above me. I took one breath. I took a step forward. And stopped. 30 feet ahead. A figure. Still, waiting. not hiding, simply standing in the open dark, in a dark riding coat, with the quality of someone who has been there for some time and is in no particular hurry. With the specific stillness that belongs to people who are accustomed to the weight of their own presence. I put my hand to the wall behind me by reflex. I forced it down. Thessaly Vorn Arden, the figure said. My full name. In the sequence, my mother had given it to me. Who are you? I said. He stepped forward. The estate's outer torch caught his face at the angle of arrival, the way light catches a face when you step into its reach from outside it, illuminating the features in order, detail by detail. Strong jaw, dark hair. A scar through the left brow, silver in the torchlight. Eyes that were, in the orange light, the color of deep water in winter. And at his throat, a crest. A crest I had seen once, in a book in the Drakenhollow library, in the chapter on the governing structure of the Northern Territories. The wolf and crown. I knew what that crest meant. My breath left my body in a single, long, involuntary exhale. You sent the letters, I said. Yes, he said. You've been watching for 3 years. Yes. Why? He looked at me for a moment, and in his expression, direct, unperformed, with the specific quality of someone who has waited a long time for the correct moment, and has arrived at it, and is not going to waste it on anything other than the truth, was something I had not seen directed at me since before my father died. He was looking at me the way someone looks at something they have been trying to get to for a very long time. Because you were in there, he said, and I could not come in after you without destroying the only legal case that would hold Cassivorn Drak accountable for what he did. So I waited. He paused. I built the case. You built the root, and tonight both of them are ready. I stared at him. You needed me to escape on my own, I said. If I extracted you, he said. It was a rescue. The ward arrangement was legal on its face. Drak's lawyers would have contested everything. But if you walk out of your own captivity, and I have documentation of the 8 months of illegal detention, if you are a free woman who has removed herself from an unlawful situation, the case is different. I was the evidence, I said. You were never only the evidence, he said. It landed with a weight that was not an argument, but a statement of something he had decided long before tonight. The cold pressed against my face. The frost-hardened plain stretched in every direction. The estate wall was behind me, and in front of me was the king of the northern Wolfen territories, standing in the dark with his horse presumably somewhere in the distance, and 3 years of waiting completed. What is your name? I said. Not the crest. Not the title. Aldrich, he said. Aldrich Vane. I looked at him for a long moment. I have questions, I said. I know, he said. There is a warm building 2 miles north. I have food. You can ask them there. He turned and began walking north across the frozen plain. I looked back at the wall of Drakenhollow estate one time. Then I followed him. Chapter 8 continues. Chapter 8. The shape of 3 years. The building was a hunting lodge, small, stone, with a fire already burning inside that told me he had been here recently and had come to the estate's outer wall and returned more than once tonight. He had planned his side of this with the same precision I had applied to mine. I sat by the fire in a chair that had a blanket on it, placed there I understood in advance, and I ate the food that was on the small table, and I asked my questions. He answered them. Not everything at once, not in the way that dramatic revelations are sometimes delivered, all at once and then processed. He answered each question as I asked it, fully and without evasion, and when he did not know something he said so, and when the answer was complicated, he took the time to make it clear. This took most of the night. What I learned was this. His name was Aldrich Vane, the Wolfen crown was his by inheritance, taken at 23 when his father died, and the northern Wolfen territories required a king 2 years before he had planned to be one. He was 29 now. He had been managing the northern territories for 6 years, And in that management he had encountered 3 years ago a situation that had not resolved itself cleanly through any available official channel. The situation was this: a ward arrangement, legally executed on its face, entered into by a dead man's daughter under conditions that Lord Cassivorn Drak had engineered over years. The Arden debt, my father's debt to Drak, had not been an accident of misfortune. It had been structured. The investments that failed had been guided toward failure by advice Drak had provided through an intermediary. The debt was manufactured. The ward arrangement was the intended outcome, because of the Vorn bloodline. Because my mother's bloodline, the Vorn line, with its documented connections to the Northern Pact territories, carried something that Drak had been trying to access for 30 years. The alliances it opened were significant. The political capital was significant. And the bloodline's expression potential, which he had apparently known more about than he had revealed in our study conversation, was significant in ways I was only beginning to understand. "What does it express as?" I said. "The Vorn bloodline. My brother manifested at 19. Aldrich looked at me across the fire. "Late expressing," he said. "The Vorn line historically presents in women later than in men. Your brother's expression would have triggered the dormant potential in the female line. It functions as a catalyst in the bloodline's genetics." He paused. "You are 24. "Yes," I said. "The trigger would have been approximately a year ago," he said, "give or take." A year ago. A year ago, I had been inside Drakenhollow's walls, running the map, feeling something at the edges of my senses that I had categorized as the heightened alertness of long captivity, and had not assigned a different explanation to. "I'm not just building a legal case for you," I said. "No," he said. "You came for the bloodline," I said. "I came for you," he said. And again the weight of it, not a performance, not a diplomatic formulation, but something with the specific quality of a statement that has been held back for a long time, and is now simply said. "The bloodline is relevant to the politics. It is not what I came for." I looked at him. "Explain the difference," I said. He was quiet for a moment. 3 years ago, I received a report about the Arden ward arrangement from my intelligence network," he said. "It was flagged as politically significant, the Vorn connections, the bloodline implications. I was going to assign it to Roven and move on. But," I said, "the report included a physical description," he said, "and a detail that was not politically significant, but that I could not stop thinking about." "What detail?" "That you arrived at Drakenhollow in November," he said, "and by December you had already begun mapping the guard rotation." He said it the way someone says something that has stayed with them, not dramatically, but with the quality of a thing that lodged itself in the mind and refused to leave. "That was the detail," I said. "I thought about it for a week," he said. "A girl who arrives in an impossible situation and begins immediately, systematically, to build her way out of it. Not from rage or panic, from intelligence and patience and—" He stopped. "I sent Essie the first letter to her the following month." "You sent Essie," I said. "Essie is yours." "Essie has been with my network for 4 years," he said. "She was already in Drakenhollow when you arrived. She was already watching Drak. When I told her to watch you also, she adapted her position." I thought about Essie at the sink. "Someone asked me to keep an eye on you." The sideways smile I had not seen before. "She chose you herself," Aldrich said. "I asked her to watch. She decided to help. That was her decision." "She's been protecting me," I said. "Yes," he said. I sat with this. 3 years of carefully constructed solitude, of believing I was building the map alone, of treating every small alliance as a bounded transaction, of containing my trust within the specific dimensions of what I could verify, and underneath it, the whole time, a structure I had not seen. Not a trap, a foundation. "Why didn't you tell me?" I said. "Because," he said carefully, "if you had known the full shape of it, you would have waited for me to move first. You would have given me the agency. And I needed you to take it yourself. Not because of the legal case, though the legal case is real. But because, he stopped. Because what? I said. Because you built that map, he said. That was yours. Every blind spot, every second of timing, every verified detail, that is yours. I was not going to take it from you by making you a passenger in your own escape. The fire was lower now. Outside, the first suggestion of gray was beginning at the eastern edge of the sky. I had been outside Drakenhollow's walls for 4 hours. I looked at Aldrich Vane across the fire, this man who had waited 3 years, who had built a legal case with the patience of someone who understood that the right moment was worth waiting for, who had stood in the dark outside the estate's outer wall and been already there when I came through. The legal case, I said. Drak. It goes to the regional authority this morning, he said. Roven filed last night. The evidence has been building for 2.5 years. Illegal detention, fraudulent debt manufacture, coercion of a ward arrangement. It will hold. My family, I said. Your uncle's house is protected, he said. The clause in the ward document is voided by the fraudulent debt. The entire arrangement is unwound. Orvin and Kala are unaffected. I closed my eyes. Orvin, Kala, 2 inches taller. The wolf expressed at 19. I need to see them, I said. I know, he said. They're 2 days north. I sent word last week that you were coming. I opened my eyes. You were very sure of me, I said. Yes, he said without apology. What if I hadn't gone last night? I would have waited, he said. There was another night, and another. You would have found the right one. I looked at him for a long time. You are a very patient man, I said. I have had, he said, significant motivation. Chapter 9 continues. Chapter 9. What Drak did not account for dawn came in the way of winter dawns, slowly, without warmth, the light arriving before any heat followed it. I had not slept. Aldrich had, briefly, in the other chair, 2 hours perhaps, with the efficient quality of someone accustomed to managing on insufficient rest, waking cleanly at the first suggestion of light, without the disorientation most people carry out of sleep. He had the quality of a person whose interior landscape was organized enough that the transition between states was smooth. I had watched him sleep for approximately 40 minutes before turning back to the fire and thinking. I had a great deal to think about. The Vorn bloodline. My mother's deliberate silence on the subject, the choice to give me her name as part of mine without explaining what it carried. My brother's wolf, expressed at 19, which had apparently activated something in the female line that was now approximately 1 year into a process I had categorized as heightened alertness and not looked at more closely. The map. 3 years of building something I had always thought of as purely mine, a product of my own intelligence and patience and the desperate precision of someone with no other tools. And the discovery that it had been built inside a structure I had not seen, not undermined by this, but complicated. I was still deciding how I felt about the complication. Aldrich woke and looked at me. You haven't slept, he said. No, I said. Are you all right? I'm outside, I said, for the first time in 3 years. I'm not going to waste it on sleep. He looked at me for a moment and then said, Fair. We left the lodge at first light. His horse was a dark bay, large and calm, with the specific quality of a well-trained animal that has been in difficult situations, and has decided that difficulty is simply the texture of life, rather than a departure from it. He helped me mount, not in the way that powerful men sometimes help women onto horses, which is to say with the performance of assistance, but practically, efficiently, because the horse was large, and I had not ridden in 3 years, and the practical help was useful. We rode north. The frost-hardened plain was extraordinary in the early light. Not beautiful in the expected way. There was no warmth to it, no color beyond the gray of the sky and the silver of the frost and the dark bay of the horse. But vast. Open in a way that the interior of Drakenhollow's walls had never been, open in all directions simultaneously. The horizon in every direction simply the earth meeting the sky with nothing between. I had forgotten what horizon felt like. Not forgotten intellectually. I knew the word, I could describe the concept. But felt. The physical experience of a horizon, the way the eye moves across it without hitting a wall, the way the chest expands slightly in response to the expansion of visible space. I breathed it in. We were an hour north of the hunting lodge when Aldrich said, "Riders behind us!" I turned. 3 of them, coming fast from the direction of Drakenhollow, closing the distance with the speed of horses being pushed. "Drak," I said. "His men," Aldrich said. "He would have discovered the room empty within the hour of dawn. He knows which direction to come." He paused. "He doesn't know I'm here." "What does that change?" I said. "Everything," he said. And there was something in the way he said it, not warmth exactly, but the specific satisfaction of a man whose plan has arrived at the moment it was built for. "Hold on." He pushed the horse. The bay responded with the willing speed of an animal that has been waiting for this instruction. Not sprinting, not the panicked speed of flight, but the sustained, ground-covering canter of a horse, with real endurance, and a rider who knows how to use it. The frost cracked under the hooves in a rapid percussion. The cold air hit my face and my eyes, and the gray wool dress was inadequate for this speed, but I held on, and it did not matter. Behind us, the 3 riders were gaining. Drak's horses were fresh. Ours had been standing for hours. "He's going to catch us," I said. "Yes," Aldrich said. "That's the plan?" "Part of it," he said. We rode for another 8 minutes. The riders behind us closed the gap steadily, and when they were 20 meters back, Aldrich brought the bay to a stop. He turned. I turned with him. The 3 riders pulled up. 2 of them were guards I recognized, estate men in the dark uniform of Drakenhollow's senior staff. The 3rd was not a guard. Lord Cassivorn Drak, on a gray horse, in his good coat, with his controlled face and his careful eyes. He had ridden out himself. He took in Aldrich. I watched his face process it, the crest at the throat, the specific quality of stillness, the horse, the bearing. The information arriving feature by feature and being integrated with the speed of an intelligent man who has encountered a situation that was not in his calculations. "My Lord King," he said, with the specific courtesy that was his permanent mode. Even now, even here on a frozen plain at dawn, having ridden out to recapture a ward who had escaped in the night. "Lord Drak," Aldrich said. A pause. "This is a private matter," Drak said. "A ward arrangement." "There is no ward arrangement," Aldrich said. "The debt was discharged 8 months ago. The arrangement is void. The regional authority has been filed with documentation of the subsequent illegal detention." He paused. "My intelligence officer submitted the filing at dawn this morning. You will have received notification at the estate by now." Drak looked at him, then at me. Something moved in his face that was not the controlled courtesy. Something underneath it, the specific quality of a man who has played a very long game and has arrived at the moment where the board is not arranged the way he believed it to be. "You have been building this for 3 years," he said. "Yes," Aldrich said. "The girl's escape was her own," Aldrich said. "She built her route herself. She walked out herself. You will find the mechanism intact if you look. Every blind spot she used was one she identified. I did not assist her escape. I was waiting when she arrived." Drak's eyes moved back to me. "The Vorn bloodline," he said. Not to Aldrich. To me. "Mine," I said. "Not yours." He looked at me for a long time. And then... This was the thing I had not expected. The thing that complicated my neat understanding of him as purely architectural cruelty. He looked tired. Not defeated. Tired. The specific tiredness of someone who has been building something for 30 years and has arrived at the moment where it falls. "Your mother would have said the same thing," he said. "Good," I said. He turned his horse. He rode back toward Drakenhollow. His 2 guards looked at each other, and then at Aldrich, and then they followed their lord. The plain was quiet. The frost was beginning, very slowly, to release where the thin winter sun reached it. I turned to Aldrich. "The Vorn bloodline," I said. "You know more about what it does than you've told me?" He looked at me. The direct, unperformed attention that I had come to understand as simply how he engaged with things that mattered to him. "Yes," he said. "Tell me," I said. "When we're moving," he said. "We still have 2 days to Orvin." He turned the horse north. I held on. And in the structure of my chest, in the place where the map had lived for 3 years, the place behind my eyes where every blind spot and every second of timing had been stored and maintained and rehearsed, something shifted. The map was gone. Not needed. Completed. And in the space it left, something else was beginning to move. Warm, deep, patient. Like a river learning the shape of itself. Chapter 10 continues. Chapter 10. What was always mine? Orvin was taller than I remembered. This was the first thing, not the tears, not the words, not the particular quality of reunion that language always fails to capture precisely. The first thing was purely visual. My brother standing in the doorway of a stone house in the northern foothills, and he was taller than I remembered, and his shoulders had widened, and he was 22 years old, and I had missed 3 years of him becoming who he was. He came down the steps without speaking. He was a wolf now. I understood this in the way I was beginning to understand many things about the bloodline, not through reading or study, but through something more immediate. I felt the wolf in him the way you feel a fire in the next room. Warmth conducted through stone, the specific quality of a presence that is larger than its container. He put his arms around me, and I put mine around him, and we stood in the doorway of the stone house in the northern foothills, while the thin winter sun moved overhead. Calla came next. 16 now. The 2 inches Orvin had mentioned in the letter had become 4, and she had the look of someone who had been doing the growing up work seriously and without complaint. She was fiercer than I remembered. Not angry. Fiercer, with the quality of someone who has decided things about themselves that younger Calla had not yet decided. She looked at Aldrich, who had hung back at the edge of the yard, with the self-possession of a man who understands when he is in someone else's moment. "Is he staying?" she said. To me, not to him. "I don't know yet," I said. "Good answer," she said, with a quality that suggested she had opinions about hasty decisions. We stayed 2 days at the stone house. In those 2 days, Orvin told me about the wolf. Not abstractly, specifically in the practical, detailed way of someone who has lived it for 3 years and has integrated it into the ordinary texture of his days. What the shift felt like, what changed in the senses. The specific quality of the full moon, which he described as a physical pressure that built for 3 days before and released on the night itself. The pack he had been received into, a mid-range northern pack with connections through the Vorn bloodline, who had taken him in with the matter-of-fact welcome of people who had been expecting a Vorn-line wolf for some time. "They know about you," he said on the second evening. "The pack, they've been waiting." "For what?" I said. "Female expression from the Vorn line," he said. "It's been 2 generations. The pack remembers it. They say when it comes back, it comes back." He paused. "Tell me," I said. "Stronger," he said. "Every generation of suppression builds it, like pressure in a system. When it finally expresses..." He stopped. "What?" I said. "They use a word in the old tongue," he said. "I don't have a translation that does it exactly. Something like the return of what was always there. The wolf that was never lost, just waiting." I looked at my hands. The hands that had built the map. The fingertips that had pressed against the mortar crack in the east corridor and absorbed the sound of Drak's voice saying, "She doesn't know that." The hands that had moved the crates and gone through the gap and come out the other side. The return of what was always there. On the second evening, Aldrich found me at the eastern edge of the stone house's small yard, where the foothills began and the first trees of the northern forest stood. He stood beside me. We looked at the trees. "Tell me the rest," I said. "About the Vorn bloodline, what you know." He told me. The Vorn line, in its full female expression, had historically manifested as something the Northern Pack records described with a specific term, a tracker wolf. Not in the simple sense of an animal following a scent. In the deeper sense of a wolf whose intelligence and sensory precision were the expression, whose ability to map, to pattern read, to build from observation alone a complete picture of an unknown landscape was not a human skill overlaid on a wolf's instincts, but a single integrated ability that was both simultaneously. The map, I said. Yes, he said. 3 years of the map. The guard rotations and the blind spots and the mortar crack and the wire and the 40-second windows and the 412 rehearsals. All of it, not despite what I was, but because of it. The bloodline had been expressing itself for 3 years in the only form available to it, in the precise, patient, systemic intelligence of a person who was building her way out. I have been manifesting for 3 years, I said. In a way, he said. The physical expression will still come, but the core of it, the way your mind works, the map, that was never just yours. It was always mine, I said. He looked at me. Yes, he said. Both things are true. I looked at the trees. The Northern Pack, I said. The ones who have been waiting. They are my pack, he said. The Wolfen Crown holds the Northern Territories. The Pack and the Crown are integrated. He paused. They have been waiting for a tracker wolf for 2 generations. When Orvin expressed, they knew you were coming. And you? I said. Were you waiting for a tracker wolf? He was quiet for a moment. I was waiting, he said, for whoever built a route out of an impossible situation, using nothing but patience and intelligence, and the refusal to stop. He paused. The bloodline was relevant. It was not the thing. I turned and looked at him. Aldrich Vane, standing at the edge of the northern forest in the thin winter light, with the specific quality of stillness that I had come to understand, was not absence of feeling, but its opposite. The containment of something large within a very precise frame. He had waited 3 years. He had built the legal case and sent the letters and stationed Essie and stood in the dark outside the estate's outer wall on the night all the pieces aligned. He had planned his side with the same precision I had applied to mine. He had been, in a way I had not understood while I was building the map, the mirror of it, patient, systematic, entirely committed to the specific outcome he was working toward. And he had not taken one step of the route from me. The case against Drak, I said. How does it resolve? The regional authority has full documentation, he said. The fraudulent debt manufacture is the most significant charge. It implicates Drak in a years-long conspiracy that goes beyond your family. There are other families. He has done this before. He paused. He will lose the estate. The legal process will take time, but the outcome is not in question. Other families, I said. Yes, he said. Your case opened the investigation, but it was not the only one. He looked at me. You are not the only person Cassivorn Drak manufactured a debt for. I thought about this. I want to know their names, I said. He looked at me. Why? He said. Because they deserve to know what was done, I said, and because the evidence that built my case might be useful in theirs. He was quiet for a moment. I'll have Roven prepare a list, he said. Good, I said. We stood at the edge of the northern forest. What comes next? I said. That depends, he said, on what you want. I thought about this question. 3 years ago, the answer would have been immediate and contained. I want out. And then, for 3 years, the answer had been the map, the patient, sustained answer of someone for whom the next step was always perfectly clear because it had been built and verified and rehearsed. Now the map was gone, and the question was large, and I was standing in a northern foothill yard with the forest at my back, and my brother inside, and a king beside me, and the Vorn bloodline doing whatever it was doing in the deep structure of me. I want to see the pack, I said. Aldrich looked at me. "I want to understand what the bloodline is," I said. "Properly. Not from reading. From being in it." I paused. "I want to find the other families Drak took. I want to help build those cases." I paused again. "And I want time. Not a rushed sequence of decisions made from the compressed urgency of having just escaped something enormous. Time to be a person in an ordinary way before I commit to anything that isn't reversible." He listened to all of it without speaking. When I finished, he said, "Yes." "Yes to which part?" "All of it," he said. "The pack can receive you whenever you are ready. The cases, Roven will have the list within the week, and your knowledge of Drak's methods will be significant. The time," he paused. "I am not going anywhere." I looked at him. "You have been patient for 3 years," I said. "I can be patient longer," he said. "Patience, in my experience, is simply the decision to stay in the same direction over time." He paused. "I have not changed direction." The winter sun was moving toward the horizon. Inside the stone house, I could hear Kalla's voice, specific, precise, with opinions, and Orvin's answering laugh, low and warm. The sounds of my family, building their ordinary evening around the extraordinary fact of being together. I looked at my hands. The map was in them. It always had been. Not the specific map of Drakenhollow's corridors, but the capacity for it. The patient, precise, systemic intelligence that was mine, and also the bloodlines, and also simply what happened when a person with a certain kind of mind was placed in a situation that required everything she had. I had been building the whole time. Not just the escape. Myself. "Come inside," I said to Aldrich Vane. "Kalla will want to assess you properly, and she is, I guarantee, more thorough about it than any regional council." The corner of his mouth moved. "Should I be concerned?" he said. "Extremely," I said. I walked toward the house. He followed. Behind us, the northern forest held its patient continuity. Ahead, through the stone house's lit windows, the warm light fell across the yard in long bars. I stepped into it. The door opened before I reached it. Orvin, who had the wolf's hearing, and had probably tracked our footsteps from the yard's edge. He looked at me, then at Aldrich behind me, then back at me with the specific expression of a younger brother who has formed an opinion and is containing it for precisely as long as it takes to confirm it. "You built a way out," he said. "Yes," I said. "Of course you did," he said, and stood aside. I walked through the door. The warmth of the house received me, and the thing that had been moving in the deep structure of me, warm and patient, like a river learning the shape of itself, pressed against its last boundary and did not break through. Not yet. Soon. On its own terms. As it had always been going to, from the very beginning. End.